The movie that made everybody say a collective, "What the heck?" Sausage Party has gone down as one of the most controversial, divisive, and weirdest animated movies ever made. Now, some love it for its humor and story, while others hate it, saying it's juvenile and not very well written. But at the end of the day, it pretty much is what you'd expect from a Seth Rogan movie with living food to look like, so its reception isn't all that surprising. However, did you know that there was actually supposed to be a moral behind this movie? Because that's what I'd like to go over today, mainly how its moral doesn't really work, especially as an allegory. And obviously, there will be spoilers ahead, so you know what to do if you don't want anything ruined. This will be the only time you'll be warned. Okay, so just to quickly recap, the main source of conflict in Sausage Party is that the living food believes that humans are gods, and when they buy them and take them outside, they're bringing them to an eternal paradise. However, once that food gets home, they instead find brutal murder, by their standards anyway, because it's kind of a foregone conclusion what we'll eventually do with food once we buy it. And so by the end of the movie, the main character Frank is able to convince all the other food in the store of the truth, and they decide to rebel against the gods and live the way they so choose. But because I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube, I'll avoid talking about that part. Now, the point here is, when you really stop and look at it, it's kind of obvious what Sausage Party is trying to say. That blind faith is a bad thing and keeps you from noticing the obvious, and once you accept that God isn't real, you'll be able to live your life to the fullest. Now, the first part of that is actually pretty true, because just listening to something without questioning it is a horrible idea and will inevitably get you in major trouble, or even worse. However, it's the second part of that that doesn't work. Now listen, after the video I made a few weeks ago about John Doe and Seven, I really don't want to get into the whole religion thing again, but to keep it short, the allegory doesn't work. Because in the movie, God is portrayed as human beings that are blindly worshipped as divine entities by the food, while in actuality they're completely oblivious to the fact that they're alive and just want to eat them. And the reason this doesn't work is because gods do not just walk around doing random stuff that we just shrug off. Part of the reason we have so many different religions is actually because the physical evidence of the existence of one particular God is impossible to prove. But by the same token, it's also impossible to really disprove. Now, even the movie itself points out that you can't just tell people that they're wrong and that their situation is hopeless, but you have to show them that there's another way. And again, that in and of itself is an excellent point. But in terms of religion, the other way the movie's offering is that you just have to accept that God isn't real and live your best life as you see fit. And if that's how you choose to live, then that's absolutely fine. I'm very happy for you, actually. But at the same time, as I said, the analogy falls flat because in the movie it's obvious that the gods are anything but, while in real life there's no proof one way or the other. So saying God doesn't exist is just as wrong as saying he does exist, because there's no physical proof of him to begin with. To simplify it as much as possible, in the movie, the blind faith in the gods mostly comes down to not questioning anything and being in complete denial, while in real life, a belief in God mostly comes down to a desire to believe that something greater is out there. And on top of that, In the real world, the question mostly comes down to whether or not a supreme being exists in the first place. While in the movie, they know the humans exist, and it's what they do that's the point of contention. And while that doesn't sound like much, at the end of the day, there's actually a pretty big difference between those 2 points. And that's why the allegory doesn't work. Now, tellingly, Seth Rogan was said to not be too comfortable with that angle to begin with. Apparently, it was Jonah Hill who wanted to make the movie a religious allegory, while Rogan just wanted to focus on the comedy and play the absurdity of the concept for all it was worth. And just by watching the movie, you can tell that there seemed to be a slight difference of opinion on what it should be, as it keeps going back and forth between being an outright absurdist comedy to being a bizarre movie who actually has something it's trying to say. And that might be part of the reason for its reception and some people's hatred of it, because even though I'd say it does manage to hold together in the end, it does feel a little all over the place and like it doesn't know what it wants to be at times. But seeing the final product, even though the allegory is still present, I think Rogan won out more in the end, as the movie seems more interested in his typical brand of humor and playing its bizarre angle in rather creative, and often disturbing, ways. And if I'm being honest, I think Rogan's approach was the better one for this movie. And it's not because I'm a huge fan of his type of humor or anything like that. If you hate his movies and his brand of comedy, you're absolutely free to. But because it's very hard to get people to take movies like Sausage Party seriously. If a movie has an absurd concept as its starting point, then it is very difficult to get the audience to take it seriously. Not that other people haven't done it before, but when you combine that with the fact that Rogan intended it as a comedy to begin with, then trying to inject complex morals into it would be almost impossible, especially with such a touchy subject as religion. I mean, I know I could get flanked just for what I've said in this video, so I have to imagine Rogan must have known that he could have faced immense backlash if that angle was played too heavily or the wrong way. But if you're willing to take the word of an amateur writer, I still would say that even considering that, from a writing standpoint, Rogan was more on the right track. Because more often than not, movies like Sausage Party only work when the writers actively embrace their absurd ideas and don't take them too seriously. In fact, taking that approach has actually led to some of the most famous and beloved cult movies ever made. And let's face it, Sausage Party was never intended to win Best Animated Feature or anything like that. And as I've already made quite clear, Seth Rogan understood that better than Jonah Hill. In fact, had they embraced Rogan's ideas even more, maybe the movie would have been better off for it. But listen, I'm not trying to say that nothing this movie plays seriously doesn't work, because its promotion of tolerance on several fronts is surprisingly well done, especially using the bagel and lavash as representatives of certain groups. You see, that was an analogy that was extremely well done and very applicable to real life, and other smaller things along those same lines as well. So it isn't like a movie like this can't get any messages across. It's just a matter of how they're saying it and what they're using to represent it. And to go back to that religious allegory one last time, let's take a look at what is considered to be one of the best allegorical books ever written, Animal Farm. You see, the reason the analogy works so well and is even taught in schools as to how to write analogy-based books is because it's so simple. The farm is Russia. The farmer is the czar. The animals are the Russian people. And when the animals have enough of the farmer's abusive behavior and taking everything while they do all the work and get nothing in return, They drive him off and decide to run the farm themselves. Eventually, however, the pigs, one specific subgroup of the Russian people, end up taking over the farm and become no different than how the farmer was before, and the animals are forced back into the same positions they were at the beginning. Now, I think anybody could get what George Orwell was trying to say with that. And Sausage Party does use these same techniques at times, as I mentioned before, but not when it comes to the religious aspect. Because simply put, we do not literally just sit around waiting for giants that we believe to be gods to take us to paradise. There's no proof of a supreme being in the real world. So we just live our lives, and if we happen to believe in one, then it might affect how we live, but it doesn't stop us from living. So as you can see, the message isn't easily translatable from screen to the real world because the circumstances surrounding the two are different. And I've never claimed to be an expert on these matters, but anybody with any degree of knowledge for writing will tell you the first rule of any story that makes heavy use of allegories and analogies is that they must be easy for the audience to decipher and apply exactly the same way in the story as they do in real life. And though Sausage Party definitely got this right in other regards, when it came to religion, the allegory just wasn't close enough for the moral to properly apply and be conveyed. Okay, I think I'm just beating a dead horse at this point. That's all I have to say on that. But now I'd like to hear your thoughts on the subject. Do you believe that the attempted moral involving religion doesn't work in the Sausage Party because its allegory was off point? Or do you believe it was done perfectly and that I'm 100% wrong about everything in this video? Please feel free to tell me in the comments. But please, let's try to keep it friendly. I only made this video to talk about a particular movie's use of analogies, not to start a huge religious debate. You are free to believe whatever you want and completely disagree with everything I said if you so choose. I just want to have a discussion with all of you. Nothing more. And lastly, thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.